Hi friends, Rebecca here, the Dragon Librarian from Farmington Community Library, and my friend Elle and I are here today to talk to you about some really exciting books that we think you might enjoy. Now, because it's October, all month long we've been talking about some books that are really spooky, some that are really scary, and some that are just overall really fun to read. So today is going to be the same, although it's a little bit different because instead of talking about specific books, I wanted to talk about specific authors. Authors that are really well known for some of their scarier works and highlight a few of them. So the first one we're going to start with, which is actually somebody who is probably considered the master of the scary story, and that would be Stephen King. Now, I know a lot of people have not read Stephen King. They might be a little bit intimidated by some of his stuff. I'm a really big fan of his work, especially his more recent work. Because he's been writing for so long, I feel like his books have gone through just a really big transition from some of the stuff he wrote back in the 70s to the stuff that he's still writing today. And one of the ones I wanted to talk about was The Outsider, one of his more recent books. And this actually, I believe, was a TV show. I'm not sure what platform it was on, maybe Netflix, but I know it was a TV show. I didn't watch it, but I've heard very good things about it. And this is about a creature who can take the form of somebody else. And basically what happens is there's a crime committed by a supposed beloved community member, but the community member actually didn't do it, and he has a rock solid alibi for that, for the time during the crime. So what happened? Well, once the investigation is underway, they find that there is this creature who is taking the appearance of that community member, and it just goes into this full-blown on investigation. And yes, it's really scary, but it's also, I think, more of a thriller than anything else, because a lot of it is revolving around this police detective work and trying to get to the bottom of what's going on. It's an amazing book, The Outsider. And if you're looking for another one that is more like a thriller rather than something very scary, I would also recommend The Institute, which is not actually scary at all. It's about kids with these psychic powers, telekinetic powers, and how they're being kidnapped by the government for these, to run for this project, and basically how the kids escape and get on with their lives. And it's an amazing book. It's a lot like his earlier book, Firestarter, that also dealt with psychic kids. But this is just an out-and-out thriller. Really well written. The characters are all absolutely amazing. Fantastic story. And a lot of people may not know, Stephen King also has written some fantasy works. His Dark Tower series is a dark fantasy series that runs for 7 books. It's really, really good. If you tend to like things that are more fantasy oriented than scary, this is a good place to start with Stephen King. A lot of his really older works, like It, The Shining, Pet Sematary, things like that, all of which have movies based on them. There are some of his more scarier works. If you read some of his more recent works, a lot of them tend to be more thriller oriented. So if you're looking for something to give you a good thrill, you might want to check out one of his newer works, Stephen King. Moving on from him, we have another classic author, Anne Rice. Anne Rice is a bit of a wild card here. She wrote a ton of vampire books and then went through a religious phase and wrote some religious books and then went back to writing vampire books. But a good place to start with her is obviously the Interview with the Vampire, which was a movie that came out in the 90s, I think, early 90s, with Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise, and it was an amazing film. Interview with the Vampire is just a classic gothic horror story. Not very long. It's a really good book to read. But what you might also not know about Anne Rice is that aside from all the vampire books that she's written, she's also written a couple books about werewolves. The first one of which is called The Wolf Gift. That's more of a thriller, actually, than anything else. It's not really a scary story. It's just basically about this man who gets bitten by a werewolf and his coming to terms with that and his new life, which he ends up actually liking more than his previous life. Not really scary at all. She's also written a series about witches, the Mayfair Witches. The first book is called, I think, The Witching Hour, and it's extremely long, almost 1,000 pages, but it's a very detailed history of this family over time and all their powers and things like that. It's a really good series. It's very interesting. So she's definitely written more than just the vampire books, although Interview with the Vampire is probably my favorite of them all. But if you're looking for something, and I find her work, she's very verbose. She writes these really lush, descriptive passages. She's not scary. I don't think her books are very scary. So if you're looking for just something to read this season that has to do with monsters, vampires, what have you, Anne Rice might be the way to go. And last but not least, we have an author who is related to Stephen King, and that is Joe Hill. I'm sure most of you know Joe Hill is actually Stephen King's son, one of his sons. And Joe Hill has written a few books, one of which, Nosferatu, was a movie that came out a couple years ago. I haven't seen it, but I heard it was good. Very scary, but what I think he is best known for are his short stories. This is his most recent book of short stories called Full Throttle. And what I love about short stories, I know we've talked about this before, but short stories are great because you get just a wide variety of an author's experiences and talents within the book, right? You can just pick it up. You don't have to sit down with it for hours on end. Pick it up, read a story here or there. You know, read one before bed, read one before work, read one during your lunch hour. And it's really accessible, I think. Joe Hill and Stephen King really too. They write from the perspective of just the everyday man, the regular Joe, and I think that even when they're writing about fantastical things or scary things, they're accessible for everybody and easy to read. Joe Hill, I like his books, but I think he really shines the brightest with his shorter fiction, short stories. And that's Full Throttle. That's his newest book, came out last year, of short stories. Well, that's what we have for you guys today. We have books by all three of these authors at the library, Farmington Community Library. So if they sounded interesting to you and there's any that you want to check out, feel free to check them out with our curbside service, and you can also go to the library itself during our open hours and go in and browse and see what you come up with. Thanks so much, friends, and have a great rest of the day.